Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are, and welcome to FreeThought Hour. Now, normally, as you know, if you've been watching recently, I have a co-host with me in the shape of Tercia, this young lady here. But she's on holiday right now, and they have a family gathering before she flies back to her homeland of South Africa. She's been staying in the UK and was our house guest. So that was very nice. However, I'm flying solo, but not without a guest. Here's our guest, John Christian. Welcome, John. How the devil are you?
I'm doing fine, John. How are you?
Yeah, I'm okay too.
Good.
Thank you.
Yeah, good.
Yeah. So I've touted you in all the publicity as an interesting guy because in our previous communications, it's come to light that you've had an extremely eventful life. not a run of the mill, raised in a township and lived a lifetime there and then died sort of existence at all.
Not at all. In fact, when I'm asked where I'm from, I don't know how to answer that question. I've narrowed it down to I spent 40 years in Toronto, Ontario, and Canada. So I guess I'm from there. That's where my career was built, and that's where I got married and divorced and remarried. And so I guess that was my life. But in order to explain why I became an atheist at the age of 57, 2 months shy of my 58th birthday.
Oh, do we want to go there
N-
immediately? Can we be
No,
a
I will say that I have to set the pace of
oh,
what happened
okay.
before 6 years before I married, before I was born. Sorry, and
Okay.
it's my it's the history of my parents. They were Hungarians, and they got married in 1951. My mother got pregnant with my sister, and they decided to leave Hungary. It was occupied by Soviets. It was communist. It was more so my father's idea. He came from a very wealthy family, and they lost everything to communism. My mother's family were working class, and they probably didn't care so much. Anyway, they got caught, and they were both sentenced to 4 years in prison. Upon hearing that, my mother apparently freaked out, and so they decided to take her 4 years and give it to my father. So then he got 8 years. That's Soviet justice, I guess. Yes, and so then they sent my mother to a psychiatric evaluation at a psychiatric hospital. She only stayed a couple of months, and she says they weren't mean to her or anything there. She got tortured later on for a different reason, but my father was in prison for 5 years, and then they let him go during an amnesty program in 1956. Uh, then my mother got pregnant with me, and apparently the amnesty was there to quell any kind of revolutionary um, talk. But it still happened in October, I believe it was.
Yes.
Just yes, it was October, the revolution, 1956 in Hungary.
Yep.
This
Yep.
time they got out, but they had to leave my sister behind because she was not with them at the time in Budapest. She was 200 kilometers in the wrong direction,
Wow.
with the idea that they'll send for her later on. They did, and 10 years later she came out, and I met her then when I was
Oh, great. Mm.
9 years old. So we moved to Canada eventually. I was born in Belgium just because they happened to be there in a
Yeah.
camp of sort. And
Mm.
eventually they chose Canada as the place to come to live. And the three of us, small family, moved there. My father knew how to speak French, so we moved to Montreal's
Mm.
well, downtown Montreal at first, and then my father was a very successful architect, and he made a name for himself. And he quickly rose to prominence. About 10 years, he started his own business, and then became quite wealthy.
Mm.
So we moved out to the West Island, bought our first house, and the reason I tell you all that is because
Oh,
my entire life, and I've only recently discovered this or thought this about myself over the past 2 years, 2.5 years or so. I've been lonely. Not in a bad way. I've had a lot of friends. I've had lots of exciting times in bands. I'm a musician. My career was wonderful. I worked in post production, started in film, and I did some audio engineering in between. I had a radio show. I was in bands that did quite well in and around Toronto. I took about 6 years off from my career. Then I went back to film after that, did two more films that I worked on. One of them was with Bruce Willis, the other one was with Donald Sutherland. So these were quite big films.
Yeah.
And then the film industry in Canada kind of died out a little bit. And I was married at this point. I had a 4-year-old son. And so I went to television and I worked in
Hmm.
broadcast for 15 years. And after that, when I was divorced, I left that and did what I always wanted to do, edit documentaries and television shows. And I did that for the last 11 years of my career. Before it ended, I had a brain aneurysm that put an end to my career at age 60.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
that encapsulates the whole thing. But the main reason of what I said all that is I always felt different. I always felt apart from.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up, my parents are people with, well, they're both passed away now. I would say they had pretty severe PTSD, and understandably so. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
from today's standards, that's how we would describe it. My father spent 18 months in solitary confinement. He was tortured.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as I said, my mother was dragged into a police station during this 5-year period because of a particular reason that I explained in my first book. I won't bore you with the details, but it was pretty horrific for her. And she was questioned and tortured. And this is the kind of stuff they had to endure before finally getting out.
Yeah.
Well, my parents divorced when in 1973, or at least my mother left, and I stayed with my father. They were troubled people.
Mm. Yeah.
So, how
We
did I
didn't.
become how did I become a Christian? Is perhaps what you may want to know. I think
Yeah. I
that's
was going to say we didn't recognize PTSD
no.
until fairly recently. It went through stages of being dismissed as shell shock, and you'll have a couple of weeks off, and we'll send you back to the front.
Sure. And for people who weren't in the military, like my parents are not, they were teenagers growing up during World War II,
Mm.
and their country of Hungary where they lived. Although my father was German, both his parents were German, but they were German nationals living in Hungary. And as I said, he came from a very wealthy family. Yeah, all they knew was just war.
Mm.
And then when it was finally over, then it was occupied by the Soviets, and that wasn't so pleasant. Yeah.
No. Mm. So I interrupted. Sorry, you were going to say about how you became a Christian.
Right. And look, ever since you contacted me and thinking about the interviews that I did 2.5 years ago, that were conducted very well, but I don't think I got the gist of the the thing that caused me to become a Christian. And that's why I wanted to start that way, so you can understand, or
Yeah.
the viewers can understand that I was facing, whether I realize it or not, fairly intense loneliness or
Hmm.
uh, or departure from other people. Like I just felt isolated all the time. And my parents were kind of cool in the way that they
Yeah.
took care of me. They were nice. But here's the thing. Here's the thing that was really kind of puzzling up until recently for me. We were Roman Catholic, so I can say I come from a Catholic family, but that's not entirely true because my parents could care less about church and Bible and priest
Mm.
and all that stuff. They
Mm.
talked down. They always talked about that in a very negative light.
Uh-huh.
But
Mm.
they're Catholics,
Yeah.
right? They're Catholics. Now, growing up in Montreal or in the West Island of Montreal, I don't know if it's still like that, but there were two school boards. There was the Catholic school board and the Protestant school board. And the one thing my parents were not was Protestant. I didn't understand what they hated the concept. Oh, it's terrible. Terrible people are Protestants are terrible. Don't you hang around with those Protestant boys? And I did make
Mm.
some friends, and oh, they didn't approve of that at all because we're Catholic. So I went to a Catholic school. And of course, we had religion class, and the Catholic school that I went to, there was a church attached to it. So everything was to do with the church, either in the church
Yeah.
confessing or something. Something was always going on about it. And I didn't understand any of it. Any of
There's
it.
a whole there's a whole calendar of church stuff, isn't there? That
The whole thing confused me. When it came to confession, I got very intimidated. Like confessing what? Like I didn't do anything bad. So
yes.
it was just horrible, and I didn't like any of it. And that was fine by my parents because they hated it all too. So you think,
Yes.
hey, I'm a born atheist. This is great. But for some reason, and I've been thinking about this since you contacted me, so I know how to approach this a little better. For some reason, and I'm curious what you have to say about this. As
Mhm.
far back as I can remember, obviously not now, but as far back as I can remember, I believed and I insisted that there was a God.
Mhm.
That's it.
Right.
That's it. So, like, what do you do about that?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, there are some people who will claim that we have a sort of a God-shaped hole in our
Mhm.
psyche.
Oh, I heard that later, sure. I was a look at the trees kind of person. I mean,
Yeah,
clearly,
yeah, yeah,
yeah, yeah, it's obviously
yes,
we got God. Like, where's the question in here?
yes, yes, yes.
So then,
That's sort of deism, isn't it? Mother Nature
yes,
is. Mm.
and I spent the last 12 years deconstructing. I deconverted from Christianity in 2003 on April 23rd at 7:15 p.m.
Oh, you remember the time?
Yeah, it was a Wednesday. So that's when I stopped being a Christian. But
Mm.
until May of 2015, I believed still that there was some kind of God.
Mhm.
You know, and that part of the journey is we can skip through that fairly quickly, but it's all the things pointing leading up to it. So in 1967, and it was in summertime, I
Mhm.
turned 10 in July. So in July is my birthday. So I turned 10. And
Mhm.
there was a knock on the door. I happened to be home. This is in the West Island, Montreal, still, because I'm 10 years old.
Yep.
And I opened the door. My mother's at home cleaning, sweeping something up in the floor. Anyways, I open the door and there's this woman standing there and she gives me a Bible and she says to
Mhm.
me that Jesus loves me. Didn't hear any of that my school or at Catholic Church. But
Yep.
Jesus was this guy who hung on a crucifix and it was gross and
Yes.
I didn't understand why he was hanging there. It was so disturbing. But Jesus apparently loves me. Now, I still have that Bible because I wanted to make sure after I kept it all these years for some weird reason. It's not a Mormon Bible. It's not a Jehovah's Witness Bible. It's an evangelical King
Mm.
James Bible. Yeah, it's just for like, she's a Protestant. She was a
Yeah, yeah.
Protestant.
Mhm.
Yeah. So anyway, my mother came down, saw what was going on, and chased her off the property. She hated everything to do with that. While she's chasing her, literally swinging a broom at her, like right out of the movies. It was crazy. I realized that she doesn't like that woman. That woman gave me this. This is mine. She won't like me having it. I'm hiding it. And so I
Yes.
hid it. I hid it and I looked at it every once in a while, but it was just King James version. I didn't understand anything.
Yeah.
So anyway, I went through teenage life. My parents separated. I got into drugs and I became a fairly good guitarist by the time I was 16, 17. I was in my first
Mhm.
real band at age 17.
Wow.
We did too many drugs, absolutely too
Mm.
many drugs.
Yeah.
And by 18, I stopped. I quit that band because we didn't get anywhere, and I stopped
Mhm.
living that lifestyle. And then I went to college at that point, and I really enjoyed college. That was great.
Mhm.
I
Yep.
did three years in fine arts, and I majored in drama. And
Mhm.
during that time, I formed another band, which I thought was hopefully going to be an original band because I was a songwriter by this point, and I had all kinds of
Yes.
songs.
Yes.
And some of them were good, but it ended up being a show band because it was led by
Yes.
another guitarist who was better than
Yes.
me. He was 10 years older. And then we did actually become quite successful as a show band, and we were
Yeah.
making some good money.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a demand for a while, wasn't there? It's a
Yeah,
sort of
right.
Irish show band tradition.
Yeah.
This is before DJs, when
Mhm.
if you wanted music, you had live musicians,
Yes,
and
yes,
so if you held a dance, you got in a band, and
yes,
the band put on a show. So
right. One of the things that we did was really clever, and this was the other guitarist's idea. He was 28 and I was 18. You know, he taught me a lot about what it takes to be in a band. I was a good guitarist, but he really kicked it up a notch for me. We did entire medleys, like we did a Beatles medley. It lasted like 30 minutes, and we
wow.
we just moved, all these different
Yes.
songs with these
Yes.
little links that put it together,
Yes. Yes.
changing key signature. Lots
Yes.
of fun. Yeah,
Yes. Yes.
yeah, yeah.
Can I interrupt you there, because
Sure, yeah.
you've touched a nerve with me, because 40 years ago I was doing exactly the same thing. I was a semi-pro musician performing at weekends. Had a day job. I was a science teacher, but I needed some extra cash because I just bought a house and I couldn't afford to renovate it. So that's another story. But I thoroughly enjoyed being in a band, and the best band that I was in about three. One of them was a trad band, and I played bass, and that was fun. But the best band I was in was a four-piece, and I was second lead vocalist, guitarist, and we had a keyboard player, lead vocalist, and a bass player, backing vocals, and a drummer. And yes, medleys. We crammed together. We didn't go for 30 minutes like you did, but we put two or three songs together in the same tempo and smashed them together with
Yeah.
chord changes necessary to transpose. And I look back on it with joy. It was a
Yeah.
really good time of my life.
It
Couldn't
was.
do it now, of course, because if you don't play an instrument for 40 years, believe me, you can't play it after all that time. So it's in my past, but it's treasured.
Mhm. Well, I was fascinated with recording everything at age 12. My father, he really encouraged me. He didn't encourage me to work in the arts. He was very concerned whether I could make a living at it. I did. But he encouraged me to enjoy the arts. So he bought my first guitars, my first amplifiers, and he bought me a
Mhm.
tape machine, a cassette tape machine, when I was
Yep.
12. And I
Mhm.
fell in love with recording everything. By age 17, I owned a four-track reel-to-reel machine and
Yep.
microphones. And so I have those Beatles medleys recorded, and they're,
Oh, really? Really
for
good.
posterity, I go way back for recordings.
Yeah. Did you
Sure.
record them at rehearsal sessions or in live?
Rehearsal and live.
Yeah, yeah.
I had the
Mm,
opportunity at Sir George William University to record the live performance there, which was one of our
mm,
better ones. It was a lot of fun. Universities are a blast to play in, or they used to be at least.
yeah. Mm,
Yeah. But then I moved after college. I had to move. I couldn't stay in Quebec. A separatist government came into power in 1976. I endured through 1977. I was in this show band. I was in my final year of college at that point. And then in 1978, on January 1st, I moved to Toronto with a friend of mine. We were both
mhm.
English Quebecers, and there was no room for English Quebecers because you need to speak French
Yeah.
to work there.
Mm,
So, yeah, the language laws were pretty strict. And besides, this friend of mine, his father had investments in various businesses in and around Toronto, and one of them was this recording studio. My friend got a job there, and he
mhm.
said, "I'll get a job for you there. I'll make sure I get you in." And the recording studio was called Pathé Sound, and it was a post production facility for films.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I think
thir-
it's a big one.
yeah, yeah. And 13 months later, I started working there. In the meantime, I just worked at a warehouse doing something I really didn't feel like doing, but I did
Yeah,
end up meeting some interesting people.
yeah. Mm. Well, we all have to do a bit of wage slavery to make ends meet sometimes.
Yeah, and I eventually formed a band that didn't go anywhere, but one of the two of those people are still friends of mine today. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're
I'm
still in communication. So
I'm looking at your array of instruments and other equipment there. Is that a Telecaster behind you?
a Telecaster Deluxe. It has humbuckers instead of single coils.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Because no hum, yeah. That's annoying, isn't it, about Fenders? That how you've
Uh, yeah,
gotta remember.
I don't mind it. Like I actually am in the market to buy a single coil guitar because I'm a Fender person, a Strat person,
Mm,
but I don't mean to sound like a snob, but Stratocasters have so many things that can go wrong with them. So a cheap Stratocaster I just can't play. It's
yeah.
going to have to be an expensive one. I can't afford that. But Telecasters are different. I mean, they
Mm,
got three moving parts. There's not much to a Telecaster.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I am in the market for a inexpensive Telecaster, single coil. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And this
Yeah.
is a Sheridan, which is like an ES335 copy made by Epiphone.
Mhm. And I see, that's a Fender bass too, isn't it? Is
That's
it
a
a
jazz bass. Yeah.
jazz bass? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And Fender amps and amp tops
Well,
and
that's a modified Fender Mustang 3 that I totally took apart because I had a hard time always looking down at the buttons and trying to make sense of it. So it bothered me. So I just took it apart and made a head out of it.
ah,
And that way the cabinet could be used with my PV as an extra cabinet when I
ah,
need it.
yeah.
Yeah.
I've got TV gear still to
Mm,
this day. I
mm.
must work out how to get rid of it one day. And I see you've dabbled with Buddha.
Yeah, that why okay, well at 17, I was listening to a Frank Zappa song off his Roxy and Elsewhere album, and he mentions Zen. I didn't know
Mm,
what that was. So
mm,
being a very inquisitive person my entire life,
mm,
I went to the bookstore and I inquired if they have anything on Zen, and they did, and they gave me sold me a book by Alan Watts called The Way of Zen.
mm,
And that book has been with me. I have I have this is the third copy I have, but the first two they were destroyed,
mm.
burned. I believe they were. You know, book burning. Some people burn books. We'll get to that hopefully maybe later on. But yes, I was very influenced by Zen before I became a Christian at age 22. 22 is when I was living in Toronto. After 1 year of living in Toronto, I felt even lonelier than before.
Mm.
Now, Zen, I didn't understand it, but I was drawn to it very much. And as an atheist now, I still think about Zen a lot, but as well, it's not quite a philosophy, but certainly not as a religion. And there's no deification there.
Oh,
I subscribe to the idea that the Buddha is you. When you look at the Buddha, you're looking at your true self. There is
mhm,
an interpretation like that, and that's the one I use. In which case, it's not metaphysical, which
mhm.
not deifying anything. It's self-help in a sense, sort of
Yeah,
like the books I write. Those are self-help as well.
because there's a sort of a bit of a revival, isn't there? Because what's this modern version? There's a Zen um, mental.
Mindfulness, is that what you're thinking?
That's it. Yes, that's the one.
Mindfulness,
Yeah.
mindfulness, yes.
Mm,
I'm part of a wellness center right now. I've been looking for some therapy or someone to talk to because I'm in the worst possible way right now for again for loneliness, and it's nothing. You know, I'm not saying anything bad against my wife, whom I love, and we get along fine, but my circumstances have led me to this point, and it's been driving me kind of crazy, actually. I mean, we were all affected by the pandemic, but you know,
mm,
for me, it was a kind of a series of things that took place, and the
mm.
next thing you know, I've been about 5 years. I just don't have anybody to talk to. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And then,
The brain aneurysm really messed me up, you know, and changed everything.
yeah,
Changed my whole trajectory in life, and no, I didn't reach out to God. You know, I didn't feel the temptation to, you know.
well, tell us a little bit more about how you finally broke with all forms of theism, because you said it was painful.
It was, well, so let me, I'll just take you very quickly through some really strange things. You may have seen, I purposefully posted a few things on Twitter. I know you saw some of them that
Yeah.
I
Mm,
did that on purpose
mm.
because at 22, I became a Christian. I watched a televangelist on TV. Yes, yes, that's what happened. It was, yes, that's what I did. And he says, touch the screen. And I did. And I cried and I prayed the sinner's prayer. Yes, I made a fool of myself. And I went to church and I had long hair and I drove a motorcycle. I didn't quite fit in. And then, you know, I stopped going after just a few weeks. And I said, no, 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 I'm going to be a Christian all on my own. I had long hair and I
Uh-huh.
know, you know,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm just going to be a Christian without going to church. But then about a year later, I got a girlfriend who wasn't a Christian, and I said, "Oh, forget that. This is much better." So, but of course, I still believe in God, and that relationship didn't work out. Eventually, I met somebody else who I married, and when I married, on our very first date, I said, "You know what? I got to tell you something." As I'm rolling this joint of hash and passing it back and forth, and I'm drinking beer, she's drinking wine. You know, I'm a Christian. And she goes, yeah, well, so am I. I said, I'm the kind that doesn't go to church. She says, so am I. Okay, cool. I guess we're made for each other. And we never really talked about it much after that, but we
Yeah.
went through a kind of a hell between when we got married and 7 years later. We got married in 83. In 90, we did our last show. When I mean I mean the woman I married ended up being in the band for the last
Oh,
4 years, and
right.
she became the vocalist.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And you saw a bit of that if you watched it. This was an industrial band, about as far away from any of my dreams as possible. People wondered, what's wrong with John? He's a great guitarist and singer, and now he's not singing, he's banging on metal. And his wife, who can't sing,
Oh dear.
can't hold a tune, is like shouting and yelling. It was weird. It was very, very weird. Um, but what got there, that's why I wrote my first book. I wrote the first book to explain this is the reason I did this stupid thing.
Hmm. Is that
Well,
the first episode of the Kialo trilogy?
no.
No?
It's this very thin book, and it's
Mhm.
called Unfolded and Grown. And it's a play on words because our very first album was called Unfolding and Growing. It's industrial music, hardcore industrial music. I became an anarchist during this time.
Mhm.
So
When you said industrial music, I sort of wondered, what's that?
I
Is it
know, well, it
is
has
is it
several
is it
definitions. It
is
has
it sort of metal rock or?
No, but it has several definitions, but the best way to describe the version we did is what I call classical industrial music, literally playing on found objects.
Mm,
I had some drums. In the beginning,
mm,
it was all just found objects, and I put
yeah.
contact mics on them, really made weird sounds and very rhythmical. And I would, because at that point I had two bands already under my belt. I was well known in Toronto. I could
Mm,
make just phone calls to people, drummers
yeah.
from other bands, and say, hey, you want to
Mm,
join me on this thing? It was
mhm.
never a band, it was an ensemble. I controlled
Yes,
everything.
yes.
So people wanted to play with me, they wanted to be part of this
Mm,
because we did big venues. I was part of the anarchist convention in 1988.
wow.
We also my wife, my ex-wife now, we paraded in the gay pride parade because
Mhm.
the gay community just loved what we did because we were very, very festive.
Yes.
And so we were in the Gay Pride Parade in
Mhm.
1988.
When it all started, really, the gay pride movement.
I think it started, maybe a few years before that, but yes, it was just like a weekend. Wasn't even a weekend. It was one day. They paraded. They
Yes.
ended up somewhere. Then we had a big party, and that's
Yeah.
all it was back then. And it was
Can I can
a
I
lot of
interrupt
fun.
you here?
Sure, yeah.
When you said classical industrial music, I immediately thought of John Cage.
Classic.
Oh, classic. Right. Okay.
Meaning, pare down. Nothing is an instrument. Everything is
Yeah.
a piece of metal,
Mm,
a pipe. I
yeah.
did a
Yeah.
lot of assembling of things. I created stations,
Yeah.
and you can just play all these different things. And then
Yeah.
she would recite whatever it is I wrote, because she wrote nothing. I wrote it all.
Yeah.
And I was angry. I look
Hmm.
back and say I was very angry. I was angry at something. I think I was angry at myself because I was trying to make a point. And the song I posted on Twitter was called "A God or a Beast," which is about as sacrilegious as we got. Like, we really put down religion. But my wife and I, we believe there was a God, but not the God of the Bible or any of that nonsense.
Yeah. Now this is interesting because it's it's not uncommon for people to call themselves Christian, for example, and yet to want to practice on their own. Because
Hmm.
the trouble with the existing denominations is they've already got a concept of God and a dogma or a doctrine, let's say, not necessarily a dogma, but a doctrine.
Hmm.
And you may not agree with all of it because everybody wants a personal God. In other
Hmm.
words, they want their God to agree with them.
That's right. That's
So
right.
basically, it's another way of saying I want to be God.
I guess so. Very, very good. Because I never agreed with hell. Hell was just like, forget, that's stupid. Obviously, the worst thing about I thought hell was, I guess, eternally separated from God, whatever that means.
Yeah.
But no burning, no suffering, no torture. Whoever, that's medieval nonsense, I always thought.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah. But then, after this whole thing ended, I quit the music scene because I saw it going nowhere. And I had a
Mm,
4-year-old son, and I had a skill. We were making $700 a month at best.
mm, yeah.
Oh, having lots of fun doing it. But it was
Yeah.
time we grew up, and I was 32 years old, and it was
Yes.
time.
Yes. Yes.
So I went back to film, and all of a sudden I'm making a lot of money. And
Yes.
so my ex-wife said, oh, okay, well, I guess that's pretty good. We've got money. So then we stopped doing it altogether. Less than 2 years later, we were in a Baptist church.
Oh,
Yeah. And
that's
for 6 months we went to that Baptist church, and then it was summertime because we started going in February of 92, and but that summer we went camping, and she said to me, you know what, this church isn't working out, there our son is the only child. It was a dead church. They didn't have a pastor. They were looking for a
yeah.
pastor. It was a big mess. I don't know what was wrong with this place. So I tended to agree with her that, yeah, maybe we should find a church that's a little more lively. Oh, she
Yeah.
says, I found one. I found one. It's really lively. I knew nothing about denominations. Really, I just knew I liked Jesus because he has long hair and he's a socialist and he heals people and doesn't charge them for it, and he
Well,
feeds them and he hangs around with prostitutes and all kinds of cool people that I probably would like to have as friends.
well, there you've just said a whole load of things that a lot of Christians would argue with.
Yeah, I know, but I am
Particularly,
Canadian, with a Hungarian background, so
yeah,
yeah, I'm
particularly
a kind of a
they wouldn't agree that he was a Christian. Sorry, that he
social.
was a
So,
socialist. Yeah.
well, that's how I saw him. He's such a
Yes,
and
yes.
he fought against the clergy, which is like, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
what a really badass dude.
he certainly seemed to want equality more than many people of the day and
Yeah,
age.
he stopped the woman from getting stoned. I
Yes,
mean,
yes,
that's cool. That's a cool thing to do.
yeah, absolutely.
So, so then she said, it's a lively church. It's called the Pentecostal Church. I said, what's that? Wow,
Yeah,
you'll like it. They have a great band. They did.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
yes. Now, I will draw a distinction between the Pentecostal church, which was downtown Toronto, which is what we started attending, and the Pentecostal church that when we bought our first, oh, well, we only bought one house together. We bought a house in the suburbs that were far away from downtown Toronto. Then we changed and we went to that church. That
Hmm.
Pentecostal church was nothing like the downtown Pentecostal church,
Ah,
but something, because I'll give you an idea of what this Pentecostal church was like. Just one little story, and that was I was on the worship team. I got on the worship team fairly quick because I just play music and I'm always talking about music, and they needed so I'm on the worship team. And
mm,
early on, we're doing whatever we're doing, and we're just playing the gentle part, and then there's someone's praying, just before the sermon. And all of a sudden, this woman, I didn't know what was going on. Someone in the audience, there was about 600 or 700 people in this church. It was a big church, starts speaking in tongues, but at the time I didn't know what it was. Like,
mm,
it just sounded like someone's just yelling out in a foreign language. I don't know what.
yeah.
The pastor comes up to the microphone and shuts her down right away. He says, "We don't do that.
Oh,
We don't do that in this church. If you're going to speak in tongues, you
mm,
have to mutter to yourself quietly, and but we don't do it like that." So that tells you what kind of Pentecostal church it was. It wasn't the kind that we
yes.
generally associate with Pentecostal. And so I
No,
didn't know. I didn't know. I thought, I figured, oh, that's okay. Shut
yeah,
that person down.
yeah. There's not a lot of tolerance between the different denominations, is there?
No,
So,
no.
so speaking in tongues wasn't acceptable.
It
I've
was,
heard,
but you had to do it privately. You couldn't
yes,
just
yes,
shout it out.
yes. I've heard that mocked as bought a Kia should have bought a Honda.
Yes. Well, I never spoke in tongues. The Pentecostal church in the suburbs, everyone's just barking like dogs and just acting like rolling around, speaking tongues. They're putting
Wow.
oil on their foreheads, and I don't know what the hell is going on. They're all falling over.
Did you do the hands in the air?
Oh, sure. I mean,
Mm,
for music, well, first of
yeah,
all, I'm on the worship team,
yeah,
so I
yeah, yeah.
can't because I'm playing.
No,
But
no.
in the times when there was music, sure, I've been like, oh yeah, I'm really feeling this music, just like I'm at an Aerosmith concert. It's no
Mm,
difference
yeah,
really.
yeah.
And I can say that now, but even near the end, when I was totally deconverting from Christianity, I would say things like, "This is no different than going to a concert," or like,
That's right.
even if Jesus didn't exist, it wouldn't matter because he said some pretty cool things." And this is the kind of way I was talking, and so
Mm,
therefore that
mm,
didn't go over well in the church.
mm.
So jumping way ahead, and this is we did move. We bought a house. Something happened. It's kind of ugly. I will say this much, and you just take note that our lifestyle, I don't like that word, lifestyle. The life that we lived was still, I drank beer, I smoked pot.
mm,
My wife liked to drink wine,
mm,
and this is the kind of thing that we did.
mm.
And it was unspoken. We weren't making a big deal out of it, but she was getting more and more convicted, and I wasn't, because
Yeah,
I just didn't see a problem with it. I can still believe in Jesus and be a Christian and be on the worship team. I'm not stoned or drinking when I'm doing that, but in the evenings, if I want to do that, or in my off time, why not?
sure.
But something happens when a person gets really convicted of it, and they think what they're doing is bad and sinful, and they have to,
Mm, mm,
I don't want to get into somebody else's problems or head, but it became a problem.
mm.
Not the drinking, the attitude that was associated with the drinking.
Yeah,
And so the irresponsible nature of the drinking too. Like I
yeah.
said, I do it, when it's the right time to do it. I don't drink and drive.
No, no, in
That
your leisure hours. That's fine.
that that wasn't necessarily the case
Mm,
for
mm.
my ex-wife. And so
Thing
she
is,
got her she
once
got
you've had,
herself, yeah,
sorry, once you've had your head filled up with the concept of sin,
yes,
you start looking for it.
that's right.
You
I
identify it where previously you didn't realize that it could be labeled like that.
Yeah, and I just that wasn't working for me. For sin, I don't know how I really defined it as a so-called Christian. One of the arguments or criticisms that theists, especially Christians, may have of people like me is that you were never a real Christian.
Yes.
I think they could make a pretty good point with me on that one.
Yes.
Like, I don't argue the point. And
Mm,
I wanted to be a Christian. I wanted to believe, and this
yeah.
idea that I hear some atheists say that you don't choose what you believe. I did.
Yes. Well, I disagree with that. Is my
I,
position.
I I did. I mean, no one forced me to become that. Mind you, I do live in a society where there's televangelists on. There's no,
Yeah.
and then it's
Yeah.
it's it's easy to get drawn into that.
Yeah. Shall I
And
tell you my attitude
there's
towards
churches
it?
everywhere. So
Yes. Yes. We've got churches everywhere, but
yeah,
mostly they're now empty and turning into something else.
yeah.
You can buy one. You can buy one quite cheaply if you want.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I heard one of your shows on that.
Yes. So my attitude towards whether you choose your religion or not is this. I think that you have very little choice of your first religion because you grow up learning it like you're learning your language, your native language. It's all intermeshed. And so you can't help but form the beliefs of the intimate society of your family.
True. I mean, I never considered Islam because it's just not in my world
That's
at
right.
all. Yeah.
That's right. Well, this is why, of course, that religions are geographically based
Hmm.
because they spread like a bacterial culture from a
Right.
center of colonization outwards.
Yeah.
But your second religion is different. I think you can choose that in the same way that Muhammad Ali chose not to be Cassius Clay the Baptist anymore and
Yes.
and had to become Muhammad because he changed to Islam.
Certainly, Cat Stevens is another example for sure.
Yes, yes,
Bob Dylan tried to be a born again Christian for I think 2 albums, and then he went back.
yes,
He's just confused. That's fine.
yes,
And we love him for it, of course.
yes, yes, absolutely. Yes,
Wonderful music.
yes.
Well, I suppose it's not a religion, but I put on a lot of weight from sitting around and editing all through the 90s, and
Mhm,
because the computers came around and all that stuff, so that very
mhm.
little motion was just mainly kind of this, and
Yeah,
eating a lot of this, and
yeah.
whatever. So I joined a gym, and then someone said that, hey, you should try yoga. So I did, and I liked it a lot. And then being, again, a very inquisitive person, I wanted to know, where does this yoga come from? Like, what does that mean? And I looked it up, and we had an internet at that point. And then I ended up buying the Bhagavad Gita and reading it and thinking, well, that's pretty wild stuff. And Krishna, oh yeah, those Krishnas, people with the Hare Krishnas. Then there was a Hare Krishna temple near where I was living, so they offered free food on Sunday nights. So I went and I danced with them and had a great time. Of course, I didn't become a Christian. And while I was doing all this, we were living out in the suburbs, and I was arguing every point on Pentecostalism, including this dislike they have for homosexuals. And I couldn't believe that my ex-wife was like standing, on point that they're bad and they're sinning and all that stuff. When we marched in the gay pride parade, just 10, 12 years earlier, like, how did things change like that? So I became an advocate for the LGBTQ community, thinking that leave them alone. Like, just why you people wear sandwich signs when they were giving them out for Gay Pride Day, and asked me, "Oh, are you going to protest?" Of course not. And then I expressed my feelings on that, and people at the church, in the second Pentecostal church, were getting very tired of me and arguing with me, and I decided, and there was another thing going on. Of course, there's a reason that she's my ex-wife.
Can I just
sure
can I interrupt you here?
Yes.
I want to give my attitude towards homosexuality.
Okay.
Which is, if you don't like homosexuality, don't do it.
That's right. I don't know how you can make someone be attracted to something they're not. So I keep saying, I remember puberty. Remember how awkward that was? All of a sudden, I'm looking at girls. I don't even know why. That's just what happened.
Keep your nose out of other people's genitalia.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, my my ex-wife was obviously not on board with this way of thinking that we had earlier, because now she has a different way. Everyone can change. I don't care. But unfortunately, a lot of illegalities took place. There were instances of violence. And I don't, this is the stuff that I didn't talk about 2.5 years ago. And I still feel awkward talking about it, because it was very, very ugly. And I brought it up to the pastoral staff. I was a worship team leader on evening services, and I played bass in the morning services. So I had my own team for evening, and I played bass in the morning on the 2 services there. So I was being groomed for music ministry, and I didn't mind that. So I felt I had an in with the other people within the ministry to talk about my woes and my concerns about my marriage, and what is really going on there at nighttime. And I don't want to go into the details, because I'm not the kind of person. There's 2 things you need to know about this particular section of my story. Number one, I don't point my finger at anybody saying what they did is the reason for it's so screwed up. The other thing I want you to know is that nothing that can happen between people in a church is ever going to make me stop believing in Jesus and stop making me being a Christian. I made that vow that this place, the church, could be filled with screwed up people, but that's not the reason I will ever leave Christianity. The reason I left Christianity is because I was forced, or I felt forced, to delve so deeply into it. I signed up for online seminary for 2 years. I can do it online, and after that, the plan was to go into class, but I never did, because, well, I have a good job and I got divorced. And so I studied the Bible. I wanted to be the best apologist I can be. I wanted to write books. I wanted to go on speaking tours, and I took it extremely seriously. And I studied and I studied and I studied. And the more I studied and the more I read, the further I got away from Christianity. Typical story of, once you really delve into it, it stops making sense.
Exactly.
That's my story.
Yeah. I've spoken to so many Christians who say that what caused them to stop being Christians is they read the Bible.
Yeah. And ask questions, and and I was working with the pastors at the time, and I didn't like the answers I was getting.
Yeah.
And on top of that, there was this other problem in my life where, like, I needed some help, some support about, can we just talk about my wife and her problems?
Yeah.
Now, jumping to the end of what happened to her, she ended up with 2 convictions under her belt, and she can never work in her field again.
Ooh.
Yeah. She hasn't worked in her field since 2002.
Really?
Yeah.
It's a long time.
Yeah. And she can never do it. She can never. I mean, we're retired now, so,
Mm.
but she has to spend the rest of her life waitressing or doing whatever. I
Mm.
really felt bad about it. I was angry at the church because for 3 years, no one believed me.
Yeah.
No one believed anything I said. I
Mm.
was telling my wife, the person I'm married to now, about that since you contacted me, I've been doing a lot of thinking and preparing for this. And one
Mm.
of the words that comes to mind is triggering. People are triggered, and I understand people get triggered. And I was
Yes.
wondering, what is my trigger? My
Mm.
trigger is when people don't believe me.
Oh.
Although those 3 years were hell for me, absolutely hell. And it just made me dig deeper into the Bible and find Jesus and find some sort of comfort, and it just wasn't there.
Is that what you meant when you said you've experienced a version of shunning when they were hearing what you were saying, but just sort of closing
That's
up and
yeah,
pushing back a bit?
that's one I forgot to mention. Something that, your typical atheist deconversion story would be completely flip-flop. When I told my parents, who were divorced by this point, and I'm 22 years old, we're jumping back there, I'm a born again Christian, I'm so on fire for the Lord and all this stuff, they were very disappointed in me. Yeah. In fact, when I went through that whole thing with my ex-wife,
Mhm.
my mother eventually ended up shunning me, moving back in with my sister in Montreal, and refused to have anything to do with me until her
Wow.
death. And I only spoke with her a couple of weeks before on the phone, that
Yeah.
she allowed me to talk to her on the phone from her hospital bed.
Mm.
And but other than that, I didn't see her for about 12 years or so. She would want
Mm.
nothing to do with me. My father's version of shunning did not include not talking to me. Is just keeping me at an arm's distance.
Mm.
Mm, you know, I was still so stupid, and in my response to my mother's death in 2013, when I wasn't allowed to go to the funeral,
Mm.
but I was allowed after about 6 months. My brother says, I could take you now to where the grave site is, and you can see
Mm.
where it is. And so we went, whatever.
Yeah.
And I was still quite spiritual at that point. And
Uh-huh.
I said something really stupid when my father asked me, well, because he knew that I was all religious and he wasn't. And, I
Yeah.
believed in Jesus and all this stuff. So he thought. And I
Mm.
was still confused. And he says, well, where do you think your mother is now? Meaning that she's dead.
Mm.
And I stupidly said, oh, she's in one of 2 places. Oh, wait a minute. I take that back. Sorry. Oh, it was really dumb. And then I just caught myself. It was too late. It was really
Mm.
dumb. Yeah. Because I didn't even believe in hell, but I believed in eternal separation from a God,
Mm.
or be with God. That's what I meant by 2 different places.
Yeah.
I was so indoctrinated in my head to believe that. But let
Mm.
me tell you how I deconverted
Sure.
completely.
Yeah. Do it.
Well, in January of 2015, I was experimenting in my studio, making samples, drum samples and stuff. And I found some good samples, and I started playing these drums on my keyboard and creating a rhythm and going, oh, that sounds really neat. And go, oh, that sounds very familiar. Oh, that's one of the songs from Varoshi Fame, this band that I was in.
Yeah.
So from way back when. And so I decided, well, I got this great gear, and I can make it sound really good now, because now I got the capability to do so. Let's do a version of that song. It was our big song, big hit song was called War, and everybody seemed to like that song. So I did a version of it right there that night, and I sat back and I sang it because I didn't sing in Veroshi Fame. It was my ex-wife who didn't know how to sing, but I do know how to sing. So I sang it and goes, that sounds much better. I put guitar on it. There was no guitar in the original version. I put bass on it. I put synthesizer on it. I really made it come alive and go, yeah. You know what I should do? I said to myself, I should take the best songs of Veroshi Fame and redo them.
Yeah.
And but really make them sound good, because now I can. I'm older, I got better gear, and I'm wiser and all that stuff. And I'll do this. Yeah, a redux. So I went through the whole thing of how many songs there were. I chose 27 of them, and I started working on them. And sometime, my father died in March. March 23rd of that year, 2015. And I missed that one too, because, you know, the people weren't communicating with me. They just last minute I found out it was too late. So anyway, I am kind of shunned from my family. My sister speaks to me, but only because she shunned me back then too, but only because her son committed suicide later on that year, and everyone now shuns her. So her and I, we talk. Strange family, very strange family. But here I was, laying down the vocal tracks of some of these songs sometime in May. And I got the sheet in front of me. These are words I wrote back in the 80s.
Yeah.
And all I'm doing now is singing them. I know how they're supposed to go. And I'm singing them, and I'm looking at them. And when I tell this story, the previous two times, I don't think the energy really got across. I've been wrestling with this, you know, what is this God? Is it impersonal? Is it personal? Whatever. And right there in front of me was a song called Moon in the Water. And I'm singing it, and I'm seeing that a young version of me wrote that.
Yeah.
And boy, was I wise back then. Like I knew the answer. I knew the direction I should have gone. What was I thinking about going to Jesus and all that? I already was an atheist.
Yeah.
What the hell did I do? What's wrong with me? And so then I stopped, took the headphones off, and I muttered the words, I am an atheist.
Yeah.
And nothing's been the same since then. Then from that point, everything unraveled. Everything started unraveling.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, when you do that, you've got it's a whole world view, a belief system. And if you chuck it out, you've got to construct a new one. So
yeah.
A massive job.
Yeah, and I was, you know, it was May, and then in July I became 58, and then I realized things like, well, I didn't realize it. Okay, the funny thing is, I had no idea that there was such thing as atheist content on YouTube. Why would I? I never went searching for it. Why would I know this?
Yeah.
So soon after that, I'm on YouTube. I would watch things like music and, you know, stuff that interested me, you know. Atheism. I wonder if there's anything on YouTube about atheism. Enter.
Yes.
Holy crap.
Yes.
Yes. So one of the first things I learned was that in atheism, you don't look at the afterlife as a destination where you're going to eventually, things are going to get better in the afterlife. Or if you believe in coming back and reincarnation. No, this is the only life you have.
Yeah.
And it's all you've got, so make the best of it.
Yeah.
Not something I felt like listening to at age 58. But of course, I agree. But like, what did I do with some of the better years of my life? What the hell did I do?
Well, that's the other downside of deconstructing,
Yes,
because you realize that you were deceived, or you were foolish, and you grieve for your lost youth.
Yes. And those lyrics were in front of me, and I finished a project, and this young version of me is talking to me like, you see, I told you.
Yeah.
And it is one of the best recordings I've done. Even though it's industrial music, it's a little bit outlandish and bizarre, but it is, I poured my heart into it.
Can we hear this? Is it on YouTube?
Well, it's on Bandcamp. It's an album. It's
yes, you've given me
it's on Bandcamp. It's called Unfolded and Grown. It's got the same image as this book. And this book's so thin, it's just a series of essays that I wrote about what causes me to be the way I am. And what causes me to be the way I am is what caused me to do this, this project. Otherwise, I guess I'm crazy, which I know I'm not.
JohnChristian1.bandcamp.com.
Yeah. And it's further down on that list because it's not for everybody, but it is really well produced. If I must say, I spent a lot of time. I was learning mastering back then, and I have some good software. I was doing it all on my Mac, which I still have. It's an old Mac. Now, what happened is that I wrote this book fairly quickly. Just an explanation. It's meant to be a companion to the album. If you get the album, you get the book, kind of thing, all one. That's why it's so thin. Then I thought, well, that was fun writing that book. I'm going to write a book about my deconversion. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write a book about my deconversion. And then I thought about it. Literally in a few minutes, I'm going, that's not going to be much of a book, really. And besides, who the hell am I? I mean, it's not like I was a pastor at a church. I mean, there's people who do that for 40 years and then they deconvert. Yeah, that's an interesting story. I want to read that book. But read everything I said to you. I mean, maybe I'm a little charismatic, but imagine if all this was in a book. Who the hell want to read it? I don't know. I wouldn't.
Well, the publishing world is so tough now that really you can't get an advance unless you're already a celebrity or a member of the royal family.
That's right. So then I decided, what if I write fiction? I've never written fiction. I don't know the first thing about writing fiction. But what if I write fiction and I really exaggerate it, like a fantasy, and create these scenes that are just out of this world? Well, again, because it's a different world that I'm describing. It's this world.
Oh, it's an actual
world,
graphical world with a map and atlas and everything.
Yes, there's roads, there's seas, there's islands, there's mountains, there's valleys, there's all kinds of places, and each region has its own different name, and each region represents a certain religion that exists in our world today, but I just happen to give it a different name. And I created a lead character who eventually is not the lead character anymore because other characters come into play. But he is the first one who leaves his faith. But he lives in a place called Widdendream, and that's representation of evangelical Christianity. But it's a theocracy. You do not leave your faith in Widdendream. If you do, you get put in prison. Okay, so now he's in serious trouble, but I created him to be a very special person, second in command of the entire place. He's an advocate for the defense of the faith. Only the high priest is above him. So he has a very high position, very, very respected, and he lost his faith. Well, his family disowned him. He lost his job, and now they're coming to get him, to arrest him and put him into prison. What's he going to do? Well, he meets a person called Barnabas. Now, he has a sister. He has twin brothers who are evil. They're terrible because twins are always evil, right? Then he has a younger sister who loves him and wishes that he can just at least pretend to be, faithful. Like she's pretending she doesn't have faith, but she's pretending just so that she can get along, right? He says, I can't do that. Anyway, he meets a person called Barnabas. Axel meets Barnabas. And Barnabas has quite the story. He's 68 years old. Axel is 36. And Barnabas tells him about this path called the Way. And Kiado is a place of reason. All you got to do is follow the way. But it's not easy. It's a long, arduous journey. And many people will try and dissuade you from there. But you will meet people along the way who are your allies, and they will help you to get to the next spot, to the next spot, until you finally get there. Well, Axel leaves by himself, but he gets there with 3 other people, and eventually they cross into under Kiado's gates, and this is the first book. It's called The Way To Kiado. Now, when I wrote that, I was very excited about it. And I thought, this is a way of telling the story about deconversion from a very exaggerated, dangerous kind of thing, because my life is boring. But then something happened during the editing process. And by the way, I know you're not supposed to edit your own books, but I am an editor, and so I feel I don't have the money to hire an editor. I feel I can do it myself. Besides, it's all the only choice I got. But something happened in September of that year, in 2020, when I was writing the book. I was literally lying in bed trying to fall asleep, and I had an image in my head of a circle. I got up, turned on my computer, opened up Photoshop, created a circle, and created the image I had in my head. Top of the circle, it said ignorance. As you went down this way to 3 o'clock, where 3 o'clock, it said delusion. Down at the bottom, it said anti-intellectualism. Up here, it says around 9 o'clock, it says bigotry. And this is called the vicious circle. Because we all start with ignorance, don't we? None of us know everything.
No.
We only know a few things at best, even specialists. But what do we do with that? Well, we don't know something. We could either try and find out what it is, but sometimes it's way above our heads. I can't talk about evolution. I trust that what we know about evolution is true. I don't know all the steps. So I'm not going to start making stuff up just because I don't have the answers. Because if I do that, if I start making things up, I may start perhaps believing it to be true. And if it's believing it, then I may be acting upon it as if it were true. And what a mess that is. That's called delusion.
Yeah.
And that's the subtext of this book, The Way to Kiado. It's volume 1, a fictional analysis of delusion. That's the theme here. Now, if you continue on and you're deluded, I mean, all we have to do is look at the news these days, you know, and then they put it into action. The next thing you know, they want to hang Dr. Fauci because apparently he's like evil and shit. And so that's anti-intellectualism. You know, recently I've actually talked to people around here and I say anti-intellectualism and they ask, what is that? And I go, well, yeah, that's what it is. And this is the Barnabas Trail. Okay, this is book 2, or wherever it says volume 2. And this is a fictional analysis of anti-intellectualism. The third book I'm working on right now is called The Kialo Expansion, and it is the final book of the trilogy, and it's called A Fictional Analysis of Bigotry. Oh, that's a lot of fun, let me tell you. I'm having a real blast with that one. Because that's what happens, right? Next thing you know, it's like, oh, everybody else is evil and, you know, not us, you know. Sure.
It is a progression from moderate to fundamentalist. And that's why, although I don't want to be hard on moderates, I'm a bit wary because I think they're just the thin end of a wedge. If there were no moderates, there wouldn't be any fundamentalists because that's a slippery slope that they're already on.
Yeah. Yeah, I have people like that in this world. I mean, I'm representing about 30 some odd different types of faith systems. And I do have the universalists, as I call them, you know, the ecumenicans. They come from a town called Ecumenica. They just accept everything. Everything is it's all the same. It's all the same. You've met people like that. It's not all the same.
Yes. We have those here too. Yes. Anyway, John, it's been fascinating listening to you, talking with you. But the thing is, we've done an hour, and
I know.
That's the name of the show. So
I got it all in there. I'm really happy about that. So.
Well done. We didn't get a chance to hear about your experience of having an aneurysm, but
I had one of those, but I had it at a good time, good place. Well, good time. It was in Toronto on a streetcar in the middle of the city. Surrounded by some of the finest hospitals around. So
yeah. Well, you've obviously made a fantastic recovery.
Yeah.
Well done, John, and members of the audience, future and present. Thank you very much. I just want to announce that next week we also have a very interesting guest. His name is Chet Anderson, and he's a philosopher. I'm going to have to put my thinking head on to relate to him. He's a very powerful intellect. So look forward to that.
Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, John. Bye-bye.